Okay, you're live.
All right, 3, 2, 1. Welcome, everybody, to another edition of the Zorich podcast. I am Chris Zorich, and on today's show, we have Jerry Barca, writer, producer, alumni extraordinaire. I'm a little partial to him because, see what's over my shoulder over there? He actually wrote the book. It's called Unbeatable. And he's written some other stuff where we're actually going to talk about, but wanted to have Jerry on because he just has huge in-depth knowledge of what's kind of going on with Notre Dame. He's done some amazing things. He's produced some amazing things. But more importantly, he's an alum. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome Jerry Barca. That's our soundtrack.
Thank you.
And by the way, that was
the
intro. So for those of you who don't know, he asked if he had an intro, and I just gave him an intro. But
I meant an intro to the show. I meant an intro. I'm ready for some beats. I'm ready for some beats. You know,
man, this is Zoom to Facebook Live, bro.
I know.
Come on, man. Give me a chance.
I absolutely. I was thinking, my how incredible this is that you're interviewing me, sort of. I know we're gonna have a conversation. But the
tables have turned.
Yes, they have completely turned here, which I find is very interesting. I was thinking about this when we were doing this. One is like 9-year-old, 10-year-old, 11-year-old me would be like, "What? This is happening?" I was like a 6th grader who, like many people who are fans of yours growing up, would like do their half jersey.
I'm sorry, thanks. 6th grade, thanks. I appreciate that one.
Do their half jersey, like they tie it up and show the belly. Only I was doing that on the basketball court. Not a lot of people doing that. Yeah,
that's even better.
I'm not sure it's better, maybe goofier, but certainly better. But you point to the book. I was thinking about this today. I started research for that book in October 2011. All right.
Wow,
and
okay.
Catholics vs. Convicts ends up airing on ESPN, 5 years and 2 months later. But I remember vividly, I'm trying to get you and Tony to be accessible for the book, and Tony Rice, that is. And I remember it was snowing in South Bend in late October, snow, rain before a football game, and people were lined up to get your autograph outside there on the Irish Green behind the Barlow Performing Arts Center on the campus. And I just thought to myself, like, yeah, this is going to work out. This little venture of me writing a book about these guys, that so many people were in line to get your signature. And that was 2011. That was, 23 years after the national championship. It's pretty amazing. I don't know. Normally I would follow up that with a question for you, but I don't know.
Well, but it doesn't help that they haven't won another one since. I mean, had they won one 10 years ago, we probably would be having this conversation, It all happens for a reason, man.
Yeah, but I think it is interesting, but I think people will always have, there is that, right? Like the next Notre Dame team that does it will certainly hold a very special place. And they've gotten close a couple times.
Right.
But I also think of, that era of the late 80s, early 90s that brought the onset of the NBC contract. And it's a special place for a certain generation, much like Ara's teams are a special place for a certain generation. I don't see that ever changing. But that's just me, the guy who did a couple projects on that team.
Oh, here we go. Wow. All right. We're going to back up a little bit because I'm sure some folks who may not know who you are, if they are Notre Dame fans, they don't know who you are, shame on them. But let's kind of start from the beginning. And by the way, you're the first non-football /football podcaster that I have not had. So, dude, this is huge, man. This is, now granted, you've been in the locker room, you spent a lot of time, you room with a couple players, so I mean, the idea is that you're very close to what's going on at Notre Dame in the football program. So I'm kind of cheating a little bit by having my first non-football podcaster, you. So thank you very much for lending me all of your credence.
Well, I think it's, I'm sure Blair Keel or Steve Berline, Joe Montana, Brady Quinn, those guys could not make it. Steve Bellis is out there. He also couldn't make it tonight. Terry Andrzak.
Tony Rice, Pat Terrell, so you bumped those guys.
So I apologize, and I realized Blair Keel. Please, sorry, but just I realized I am very low on the list. That's all I'm trying to say here.
Oh, that's so
very,
unfair.
very.
That's so
I'm
unfair.
very, very low on the list. So, but I appreciate being here, and I look forward to speaking about things. But yes, I'm an alum. Went there, class of 1999.
Okay, so before that. So you talk about your 6-year-old kid playing basketball with a half jersey. I mean, were you born into it? Were your parents, brothers, siblings? I mean, who was the Notre Dame fan that you kind of, wound up getting your interest into Notre Dame?
Well, it's great that you mentioned that. There's a couple things there. So I'm the youngest of 5 from a single-parent home in New Jersey, and my mom worked for the Newark Archdiocese, and she would provide ministry for separated, divorced, and widowed Catholics.
Wow.
And she went out to Notre Dame. There was a North American Conference of Separated and Divorced Catholics, and this was, I was in 2nd grade or something. And she said, "What do you want me to bring you back? I'm going out to Notre Dame." And I said, "I want grass from the football field." It's very easy ask. Very
easy, no problem.
Yeah. So she, my mother, God bless her, she went out and she went out with a nail scissor, and she obviously couldn't get in the stadium, but went out to Cartier Field. An usher had told her, "Well, you could go to Cartier Field," and she took this clump out, put it in a plastic bag, brought it back, and I grew that for probably 4 years in its own potted.
You're kidding me.
No, I am not kidding at all.
Are you serious?
Yeah. So I grew that there, and that is the first introduction. Then, of the 5 children, I had a brother who's 9 years older than me, the class of '89 graduate.
Wow, okay.
So he was, so he went there, and my first time on the campus was in 1985. Okay. Notre Dame played Army. Alan Pinkett was a running back. And I just, for me, I knew, I'm like, I want to be at this place. And it was the students and their camaraderie with each other.
Sure.
As much as the football, and also the, I don't know, I'm one of those dudes that, I do love the place, and I love what it aspires to be. And so it was from there. Now, I was waitlisted. I will tell you that. I was waitlisted when I applied to get in. And, so it just took a lot more praying that I was lucky. I was lucky to get in and lucky to have spent 4 years there as a student. But I wasn't around much. Honestly, I was there after I graduated. I came back in 1999. I was working for the Detroit Lions.
Hold on. Back up, man. You're jumping stories. I'm going to talk about your saint of a mom that.
Oh, now we're going to cry. This is
she chose not to just get some New Jersey grass, right? She actually went and she couldn't get in the stadium, but I mean, obviously years later you're able to film in there. It's a whole different story, but. Yeah. So she goes to Cartier Field, so she gets a clump of grass. So, but before that, I mean, how did the 2nd grader know, hey, Mom, give me something from Notre Dame? I mean, was it just a fluke? Or were we just kind of an average sports fan? Or, was it, hey, I want something from Notre Dame because I think they're X, Y, and Z?
I couldn't pinpoint it, but I think, my mom's 100% Irish, born in the Grand Concourse in the Bronx, but grew up in Ireland. And I think Notre Dame as a Catholic institution and it being the Fighting Irish, I couldn't pinpoint where it started, but you knew of Notre Dame, and you knew of Newt Rockne, and Reagan was president at the time, and the whole Gipper, the sort of ethos of that was present. You just kind of knew it. So her going out there, and I was an enormous sports fan. I even as a really young kid could rattle off statistics and things like that. So I think that's what did it. And my mom was big on education. There was 5 of us, and she would say, she would really get after us in a, in a way of like, you're going to make something of yourselves or you're going to be pushing a broom at Woolworths, and they just closed Woolworths.
Wow.
So,
Wow.
you know, I think the combination of that, the value on education and the opportunity it could provide, along with it being Catholic and Irish, was always around.
So you're speaking to her in the past tense. I'm assuming she has passed on?
No,
Oh, okay.
I shouldn't.
Dude,
no,
what the hell, man?
She's very much, you know. No,
I hope she's not watching, by the way. I am so sorry. I am so sorry, Mrs. Barca. I am so sorry. Sorry about that.
I think it's the reverence. It's the reverence with which I speak about it.
Oh, I'm trying to get all like, I'm trying to be respectful. And, oh, man, really, it's just
no, she's alive. She's alive.
So when your older brother, how much did she go down there a lot? You know, with your older brother, or?
Yeah, of course we were there. I mean, we were part of that.
Okay.
You know, the Notre Dame experience in the late '80s. He lived in Fisher Hall, which for me, I mean, I lived in Grace Hall for 1 year and then O'Neill Hall for 3 years.
Okay.
But you know, Fisher Hall is always a place for me that I've got tremendous love for, because that was my introduction to Notre Dame. I have to tell you, so I flew out to that Catholics First Convicts game alone as an 11-year-old. Because I had to go to that game, and I flew, and there was a connection through Pittsburgh.
Hold on, time out. How does an 11-year-old Jerry convince mom to throw him on a freaking? I'm assuming she had at least take you to the airport, right? Or did you have to get on the bus and go there, right? I mean, what did she do?
Yeah,
did she pack her little lunch in like on a little hobo sack, you know, like?
No, I think it's just the magic of Notre Dame that, yeah, of course you'd have to be there. My grandmother, her mom, sent me with an Immaculate Heart of Mary medal, you know, to watch over me.
Wow. Well,
and,
there you go. See, you were good.
Yeah, and yeah, so I went to that game alone, and
that's insane.
Here's the thing. Like today, it would be insane, and I would never allow my kids, two of whom are older than me, to do that. Like that's nuts. Like,
you're not going down the block. What are you talking about?
Yeah, but it was never within question. You know, I mean, it was like nobody. Oh yeah, sure, yeah, let's do it. Let's make it happen. You know, let's get out there. And and of course, and so I was in Fisher Hall that weekend, and my brother had something to do, and LaFonso Ellis actually babysat me the day before your game, and Fonz, you know, for those, obviously he was a freshman, he was a parade All-American. Hadn't even played yet. The night before that game, it was Midnight Madness. You know, when, you know, you do 5-on-5 against the, you know, an intra-squad scrimmage. And I was there on media day, and I'm holding tape recorders for the people talking to Fonz.
Oh my God.
And there's a picture of me in the South Bend Tribune the next day. Yeah.
No way.
So it was, and it's the day, I mean, that day I met Roger Baldessari.
Another god.
Yeah, exactly. So, who is very much, you know, a major foundational part in the projects I've done and the work I did, writing books and doing films. And so it was it's just an incredible day. And here I am, 11 years old. And then thankfully you guys got the job done. I mean,
it would have all been for naught.
We would not be doing
Definitely.
this if that didn't happen. That's for sure. Like, if Pat Terrell slips in coverage.
Here we go.
All right, and Leonard Connolly catches that pass.
Here we go. Pat Terrell.
Isn't Pat great? Let's just talk about how great Pat Terrell is.
How about, I interviewed him a while ago. No, forget it. I'm tired of talking about him. Well, I actually wore my 88 reunion shirt in your honor. So
well, thank you.
Although I did not get a huge poster like you have in the background, I got a little skimpy book that you autographed for me. So, by the way, thank you for chapter 15, where it's all about me. So I definitely do appreciate that. But let's back up even more. So, despite the fact that the Department of Children and Family Services did not call your mom and say, "Why did you send your 11-year-old kid in Notre Dame?" I mean, let's not talk about that one. So you experienced probably at 11, and there's no way you had to know how important that game was at 11, right?
I did, because I remember. I'm
talking about like
year.
You're not flying up to watch Navy. I'm just saying,
Yeah.
right? You're not flying up to
No,
watch
you
Navy at
knew
11.
how important that.
Okay.
I don't think you could be a Notre Dame fan and not know. I don't care what age you were. I don't think you could. You had to know how important that was. And my brother's freshman year, that Thanksgiving break was the game at Miami, the 58-7 loss.
Oh, wow.
And then, and then you go down there in '87, and you've got the storyline of the Phoenix rise from the ashes, which was what Ara said at the end of the CBS broadcast in '85, and what he had said back in the early '70s. And you think Notre Dame's going to put something on Miami in the Orange Bowl, which was extremely difficult. And then, Lou comes out and he's throwing the ball. Tony threw the ball 19 times in that game.
I think, and I'm not sure, I don't keep his stats, but I think that may have been the most passes he threw all year. Am I correct?
I wouldn't doubt it if it was. It was crazy for him to throw 19 passes in a game, especially in '87 when he was taken over. And Kent Graham played a little in that game too. Yep. I want to say.
Yep.
I don't think Notre Dame. I think once they got it to the 26 in Miami in that game, and that was the closest the Irish got all day. Yeah. So you're looking at that. I remember I was at the Cincinnati Bengals New York Jets game as a kid the next day in the stands, and people were giving me noise about the Irish, and I already was talking about October 15th when we get them in South Bend.
Oh my God.
So I just think it's impossible. Everybody knew how big that game was. I mean, it was impossible to think. And then everything broke the right way. That the Michigan game where they're down, 14 or 16 points late in the game and come back and win. Everything broke the right way to have this. I mean, what an incredible, incredible showdown in that game.
You are listening to the Zorich podcast with an 11-year-old Jerry Barca who convinced his mom to send him to South Bend on an airplane. Okay. So now, all right. So you've experienced that. I would love to go back and talk to it. We got a whole bunch of stuff to cover. So you get waitlisted. Are you pissed, or are you like, you know what? Hey man, there's a lot of other people out there in the world that deserve to go to Notre Dame. That's a great thing. Come on, man. You got to be pissed.
No, I don't think I could afford to be upset. I was going to mass, daily mass, 4 days a week in my high school chapel, praying about
for the acceptance letter.
Yeah. And the other part was I had this quote, and I've never really shared this, but I had this quote. I believe it's a German philosopher, but it's about the providence of commitment. And like, once you commit, the bold action that you need to take, you will take, and your commitment, through you having a commitment, you'll produce the result you're looking for.
Wow.
The quote is much longer and more articulate than I'm providing now. But I put that quote on my bathroom mirror at home, and I wrote, an affirmation. I will get into the University of Notre Dame in the spring. I got the
chills, man. Look at this, man. I got the chills. Look at that. That's awesome, man. God, that's
I will
awesome.
get in the spring of 1995. And, just to give you the power of one's word. So my older brother says, well, they let people in, I think, in April. The spring is way longer. But I knew it all then. What are you?
Right.
No, it's fine the way it is. And my acceptance was on June 20th, the last day of spring in 1995. So I was not upset, at all. I just knew. Look, the thing was, I was just gonna figure out, if I didn't get in, how I was gonna transfer there.
Sure.
Okay. I was sort of more had that level of focus and desire to be there.
Okay, so it's your freshman year. You already have the understanding of Fonzo Wells, who's already a fan. You mentioned that you room with a couple of guys. Who did you room with?
Oh, the roommate situation. So that was a little interesting. We were in a study hall in Grace Hall. It was a converted study hall. So
I
it was
remember those.
the Grace Hall or the towers.
And there were windows there, right? I mean, because the study hall, there were windows.
It's a ridiculous
That
view.
sucks.
Like I was back. So I've been back, and I'm like, my gosh, what a great view of the dome that we had. You couldn't beat that view. That was crazy. I'm like, I did not appreciate this as much.
Well, but if I remember correctly, and maybe this was Grace, but when you came out of the elevators, like there was a study hall right there, right?
Yes, we were right next to the elevator.
No.
And we had a curtain. Yeah.
Right, but you're hearing ding, ding. I mean, come on, right?
No, I don't think, no. I think what the issue was, if there was any issue, was that there was 4 of us with no, like you're in one big room. There's no partitions. So you've got this, chip on his shoulder, kid from New Jersey, and me. You've got Mike Connect, who is a 5'7" walk-on catcher on the baseball team from Newport Beach, California.
Nice.
Yeah, who ended up like walking on, was like Big East Player of the Week a couple times.
Oh, that's awesome.
It's unbelievable. Jaime Ortega from Ecuador, who he's a very successful architect now in Ecuador. It's unbelievable the work he does. And then so you got all these but a wide array of personalities.
Sure.
And to throw in that mix, you've got a guy from the illustrious St. Thomas Aquinas High School in Florida, Bobby Brown, the wide receiver.
Right, isn't that's in Jersey, right?
Oh no, the illustrious oh my gosh, if there's somebody watching from there, they're going to lose their stuff right now.
Sorry.
That's the Michael Irvin, Isaac Bruce, college player producing high school down there. That
I didn't realize that. Oh, okay, my bad.
Yeah, so that's where Bobby Brown was from. So we were so different, and it was definitely like we were a different group. And it was just it was fun, but it's funny now because Bobby and I are still in touch. I would say, and he would probably admit to this, like as freshmen, as 18-year-olds, probably not the best roommate buddies. Probably not we weren't singing we're the 2 best friends that anybody can have. That was not going on. But we are still in touch.
That's awesome.
And communicate, and he has seen the light, and he knows that New Jersey is the place to be. So he's there now. But no, it's great. And I mean, that's, I think, another thing about Notre Dame. I mean, that foursome of people to spend that concentrated time together. I mean, that's something.
Right.
I do. I think that's really interesting.
So when you look back on that experience, and outside of your 11-year-old self, what was your favorite athletic moment during your 4 years there? Was there an experience that was awesome? Because again, then on the flip side, I'm going to ask you kind of a non-athletic moment, like maybe go in the grotto or whatever. But tell me about your athletic moment.
Well, I mean, this is very laughable given who I'm speaking to and other things I've done. But I mean, as corny as it sounds, I will often ask, when I'm introduced in front of a Notre Dame crowd, especially if it's a big alumni crowd, to be introduced, to throw in the intro that I was a 2-time Sweet 16 competitor in bookstore basketball. So, I mean, that was, I'll tell you, and I'll drill down, because
that's awesome, dude. That's awesome.
I can do 2 hours just on bookstore about my own experience. So, but I will say my freshman year, I played awful. I played with Jarius Jackson, a Johnny Sanders, Bobby Brown,
oh my God,
and Tom Daigneault, who was a 6'5" Navy ROTC guy.
Wow.
And
okay.
We our nickname was the Untouchables, or our team name.
There you go.
Despite my being a turnover waiting to happen throughout the tournament, we made it to the Sweet 16, and we were seeded 16th against Models Inc., which had LaRon Moore was a defensive back, and Lamont Bryant who was, I want to say Lamont. He could be less than 6'7", but right in that like 6'4" to 6'7", like a foot taller than me range, because he guarded me in the game. And we were behind the bookstore, and we had met beforehand. And Jarius said we met in someone's dorm room. And I think it was a Johnny's before the game, and like we're drawing up stuff of what we're gonna do. And Jarius just kind of looks at me and he's like, "Yeah, they just are thinking you're just gonna turn the ball over all game." And it was this moment, Chris. I'm like, wait a sec. Other people have noticed this. I mean, I knew it was happening.
Oh my God.
But other people, like, this is like a thing that people have picked up on.
Oh, that is
Like,
hilarious.
so I ended up, we lost the game, but I played ridiculously well. Like, so much so, like, I cut up to the top of the key and I hit a jump shot, and I looked at my hand like it felt so good. Like, what happened there? And then, like, it was back when you would raise the roof, when that was cool. So I'm doing this, and like, I'm the smallest guy out there, so the crowd is into that.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, and for those of you who might not know what Bookstore Basketball is, it's this huge, gigantic basketball tournament that they have at Notre Dame. It's just a whole bunch of students, and I think Sports Illustrated has highlighted it at least several times as like one of the largest kind of basketball tournaments in the country. Well, at least a couple of years ago, that you had like a college, you had students play.
Yeah, well, I think it was actually, I want to say at one point in Guinness, it was the largest outdoor 5-on-5 basketball tournament in the world.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Because you would get close to 700 teams.
Oh, and then everybody played. I mean, you had was Monk still playing when you were playing?
I don't know if Monk was still playing in Bookstore, but like you'd have guys go out there and they would perform some Bible passage as characters.
Right. Oh yeah.
Again, like they would let themselves lose 21-0, but it would be some performance art.
Right.
That they would be doing. Yeah. I mean, Lou had a team. Lou played.
Yep.
Yeah. Didn't he take like Tony and Tim Brown?
Yeah.
Like
yeah.
David Rivers or
right.
something.
And then I think, but at one point you were only allowed. I think you were allowed 2 varsity players, but then if somebody graduated, you could also they could be on their. Well, I'm sorry, if their season was over. Right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Because I think there was, although I never played because I have no basketball talent, which I understand that, but I remember watching. I forgot what team it was, but I think it was Lou's team, and they wound up either being in the Final Four or either winning it or something like that.
Yeah, I think Lou. I know one of the years Lou made it to the Final Four, and maybe he lost to Ricky Waters' team, which I'm sure is a lot more interesting than I know about, given the relationship.
Well, how about the fact that the president, who actually, so we're talking about Monk Malloy, who actually played basketball at Notre Dame, who again lived in the dorm at Notre Dame, which is a whole different thing. But the fact that he had a group, and I think the name of his team was All the President's Men, right?
Oh yeah, yes, you're right. Yep, yeah.
And they were like hooping.
Well, it's funny because then the team names would also, they brought a lot of street cred in my world, like that loved Bookstore. Like if I meet somebody and they were on, I think it was like Tequila White Lightning, I'm like, those guys were legit, man. Right. You could play ball. Like if you were on that team, you had to play ball.
That's crazy.
We had like NBT was nothing but trouble in my era, prime time. Malicious prosecution was a law school team.
Yep,
was like
that.
and if you
but it's a
were
history.
on that team,
like you were saying, for 6 years or 8 years, like they were a stud team because they had the older guys. And the older guys said, hey, in order to actually play, you got to actually play. You can't let this name go down in vain. But that's crazy,
you would have to play into that team, and you'd find guys and So
Jerry, I'm gonna have to write that down because I did not see that in your bio. You did not include the 2-time Sweet 16 Bookstore basketball at Notre Dame. So that is impressive.
Oh, and just to keep it real, my sophomore year, we were up in the round of 32. We were in the round of 32.
Okay.
We were up 20-15 in a game. So point. All we had to do was score a point. It's win by 2. And we lost 41-39 It was the longest game at that time.
God.
I don't know if it still is, but it was like over 2 hours.
Do you remember who you played?
Yeah, of course I do. Gosh,
Okay.
why you got to go there?
I'm just
Hurtful.
saying.
That's hurtful. Yeah, it was.
Hey, I didn't get a goddamn game ball. Okay, so I'm any dig I can get, I'm in, man. So who was it?
It goes back Antoine Jones's team.
Really?
Antoine Jones, yeah.
He's a cop now in South Bend, right?
He is, and a football coach. Yeah. So Antoine Jones, who at times was referred to as the next Chris Zorich.
Yes, because he looked a lot better than I did. He looked a lot better than I did. All right, so now give me your non-athletic story, right? So that was a great one. So give me something like, it's December in South Bend. It's 30 degrees below zero. You decide to walk out to the grotto. You're looking at it by. I mean, give me one of those moments. Or are you so hardcore you never had one of those?
No, well, we all know I'm hardcore. I mean, let's keep that real right now. But I would say, it's the interesting thing about. I would say I love the friendships and that sort of the camaraderie you built up with people. Yes, I love going to the grotto. It's my favorite place on campus. So I went to that well a lot, so much so that there's not probably a singular moment where it was like, oh, this, like the letter, like Tom Dooley's letter that's there at the grotto. But I would say, I couldn't pinpoint to a moment, but the experience of being around good people where you were called forth to be, your better self. And that if you worked hard and produced, like all these opportunities could come. Like it was the truth. For me, where I came from, I got to work in the athletic department while I was there in the sports information. And, I worked hard and was like, oh, do you want to work for NBC during football games? And I would think like, man, here am I, working for NBC during Notre Dame football games. And I'm 19 years old, 20 years old. I'm not sure there's a better opportunity. And I think for me, that's the place. And it's funny, I will tell you something else. And this is a bit interesting. When I left Notre Dame, I was clear I was ready. I was ready to graduate. I did my 4 years and I wanted to go out into the world and see what was there. And then I appreciated so much more the line that Notre Dame draws.
Right.
For, this is who we are.
Mm-hmm.
This is who we're going to be. Because you spend 4 years there, you think, for me, I don't want to speak for it, but I think, well, the rest of the world is going to be like this.
Absolutely. It's great. No one tells you you're in a bubble.
Yeah. And it's not, and it's not that the rest of the world, there's something off with it. You're not constantly held to account for something elsewhere. And I think those are the things to me that is always kind of like the pull there. And you were representing something. You were representing something bigger than yourself, for sure.
Right.
So but singular Notre Dame moment, I did. So I will say this: I might have been a non-frequent mass attendee until my senior year.
Oh, really?
And yeah, and then I would say my senior year, attended mass in the dorm was definitely like, what were you doing? Like you couldn't make time. What were you doing on Sunday night? But that would stick out.
So just so people understand this, and I thought, although I'm not Catholic, I thought this was really cool that, and everybody thinks, oh, with Notre Dame you have to go to church and everything else. I mean, you're not required to, but the idea that each dorm has their own mass, it's awesome. And I used to go to my girlfriend's mass, used to go to our mass in Soren, but the idea that you could have this friendship, this bond of having a mass with your dorm mates, with the kids on your floor, with the people in your dorm, I thought was really great. And from a non-Catholic looking in, like it was kind of like, man, this is really, really cool. So for those folks who might not know that each dorm had their own, and then they were smart about it. So I think it was like Sunday night, right? I mean, so it wasn't like, 6 o'clock Saturday morning or 6 o'clock Sunday morning. I mean, they were smart about it. They did it like, I think it was like at 10.
Yep. I mean, that's where it was
Yeah.
for me. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
10 o'clock at night. And the other thing that you're describing is you look around and it's all your peers and your contemporaries that are generating this.
Right.
Yes, there is a priest there.
Mm-hmm.
But like beyond that, you're doing the readings, the songs are, it's generated by your contemporaries. And it brings this sense of belonging and community without having to say anything about it. It's
Absolutely.
almost a physical phenomenon that's occurring.
And again, it wasn't one of those things that was required. And, like Jerry even talked about, right? He didn't start going there till senior year, but it's the idea when you participate, it's the idea that like, hey, this is my community. These are my dorm mates. These are my peers. These are people that I share lunches with. I share my dinners with, share my breakfast with, and I also share mass with them. And when you're in that environment, it's something special. I really believe that. So that was very good. You're listening to the Zorich podcast with Jerry Barca. If you'd like to listen to our other interviews, please check out my YouTube page at Chris Zorich 50. If you like it, click subscribe, please. So now we've kind of gone, so let's say your senior year, you mentioned before you're ready to get out of there. And I'm assuming you're going to get any job you can, or what you're looking at. I mean, I saw Lions opportunity there. So, I mean, when you're making that transition, what are you looking at? I mean, you aren't like a journalism major, if I'm right?
They didn't have journalism.
Oh, they did. Okay.
Now it's a minor. But
okay.
They actually didn't. So I was of English and American Studies.
Gotcha. Okay.
And so I worked, a lot in sports information. I would say that was probably a third major. Okay. Working in sports information at the time I put there, which is now Fighting Irish Media.
Right.
And it wasn't like I could take any job, like, oh, I have my pick of where I'm going. That was not the case.
Which is also an interesting reality when you leave Notre Dame, because, you're thinking, hey man, this is great. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, really? Really? And then you run into that Notre Dame bias, which is like, what? But,
I don't know about that. I'm not trafficking in that. I just think you have to keep earning it. You know
sure,
what I mean? Like,
sure. No, you're right.
And I think that, and we can talk about other parts of my career path there where I didn't think I had to keep earning it. But I think a couple things. I had an internship available to me with the NFL going into my senior year, but had to turn it down because I needed the money from my summer work to be at school. But I did, and there were plenty of NFL teams that were like, we got your resume. You could have saved yourself the postage.
Wow.
Thank you. They weren't that harsh, but I did end up getting an opportunity with the Detroit Lions to work for them in media relations. And it was funny. It was a crazy year for them because, I left Notre Dame. I went to do a position with the United States Olympic Committee with the World University Games in Mallorca, Spain.
Okay.
Which was definitely very cool. Like Kenyon Martin, who ended up having a great NBA career, was on the USA basketball team there. And he was fun to see. And he became the eventual number one pick. It started there. Misty May was on the women's volleyball team.
Yeah.
And my buddy who's a Notre Dame buddy was working with that team, and he's still working in football for the University of Wisconsin. So it was a great experience. And then I'm like, yeah, I'm on top of the world. I'm gonna be commissioner of the NFL. Let me just make this pit stop in Detroit. And I get off the plane and go to Detroit, and Barry Sanders is going to become the all-time leading rusher that year. Because like a sub-average Barry Sanders year would have had him surpass Walter Payton.
Sure. And
2 weeks in, he faxes in his retirement from football. So it was crazy. It was very tumultuous for the organization. And to be there provided, not that I could articulate the experience in the moment, but certainly to be there was, wow, what an experience. So a lot of people ended up leaving the organization, so much so that I now refer to myself as the Dwight Schrute of special teams for the Lions that year, making it a little office reference for your listeners.
God.
But I was assistant to the special teams coach on game day.
Oh my God.
For our home. So I would be there. So I would be there in the huddle with a clipboard and a stopwatch, and I was taking, the 3 times you do on kicks, and I was getting the play call and charting the play. And this is when you had faxes, so I'd run over and I'd get the faxes.
Oh my God!
Yeah. So it was very interesting. But at the same time, I'm like, I'm not sure this is going to work for me long term. And then I shifted and went to Syracuse and was a grad assistant there with football. And not with football, with athletic communications, but I worked closely with the football team there. And Dwight Freeney.
Is that where you kind of got like this idea of kind of like journalism, or I mean, were you trying to kind of tie everything in, or?
Yeah, no, I wanted to tell stories that would make a difference. So I got a journalism degree from Syracuse, and I wanted to tell. I wanted to tell these stories about people that would make a big difference in the world. That's what I aspired to do. I'm not, and then, so I did that as a newspaper reporter, which was, it's an industry that has definitely fallen on hard times.
Sure.
So I got into it as it was trending down.
Okay.
I was, I would say as a newspaper reporter, we talk about Catholics versus convicts, but I would say Hesburg and I did a series of newspaper stories on an 11-year-old African-American boy who died of cancer. And I was with him at his bedside when he died. And that was tremendously impactful in my career. Like it was, and I would say the response, at least in the Notre Dame community or in the people that I was in theaters with that saw Hesburg, was similar to the response that you saw for Elias, this little boy. And, so I wanted to do those stories, but then when I did Elias.
So how old are you at this point? I mean, you're not even 30, right? You're like 20.
No, I'm not.
25?
I'm 28, about to turn 29. And I had worked in the newspapers for a couple years.
Okay.
And it was funny. I'll tell you, Chris, I was at my desk and I got a call, and it was a PR person from a hospital. And she said, you have to cover our Christmas party for kids with cancer. John Tamari did it last year, and you have to do it. And I'm on the phone, and I'm very New Jersey, and I'm like, in my head, I'm like, listen, you don't tell me how to do my job. I didn't say that out loud. But
Right.
And I'm like, John Tamari, he's like the consummate nice guy. I am not that guy. And by the way, John Tamari he covers the federal government for the Philadelphia Inquirer, so he's still in the business and has been completely successful. And I said, but I hung up the phone. I said, gosh, I probably need a reality check, because I felt at that time in my life owed me more. Come on, I had a Notre Dame degree. I had a master's degree from the Newhouse School at Syracuse. Life owed me more. But I said to her, listen, if there's a good story there, if you think there's a few good stories that I could focus on, let me know. And I met Elias there. And actually, crazy, this actually has to do with you. And this is very funny. So I meet Elias. Now, I'm 28, I look the way I look. And here is this African-American kid on crutches, sweating, working his tail off to enter the party. So, and he's sitting down next to me. Now, there's so much for us not to relate about, okay? I mean, you can see it. And so I talked to him, and, we start talking about PlayStation. And I still played PlayStation then. I might even still play now, just a little, just to relax. But so we start talking about that, and then, he had a Shaquille O'Neal jersey on, so we're talking about basketball. So I can talk about sports. I can do that. And then I asked him what he did, what he was doing the night before, and he said, he was praying that he would wake up, that he wouldn't die in his sleep. And right. He's 11 years old, dealing with his own mortality. And I asked him, what his favorite prayer was. And he said the 23rd Psalm. Now, the only reason in that moment I knew the 23rd Psalm is because of a 1990 Chris Zorich article in Sports Illustrated. And it's, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of darkness, but I fear no evil.
Dude, come on, man. You got to be balling over here, man.
I know. I see that. But, I went back and I went to my editor and I said, I want to tell this guy's story. I want to spend 2 weeks in his life. I want to tell his story. And I called his mom and I asked her, and she was kind of okay with it, because she thought more people would be praying for him. And it became this sort of, this was before Facebook. This was before things went viral.
Sure.
And I wrote these long pieces and got into his life and a bit of his backstory and where he was. And he was precocious. I mean, he was very wise, and the family didn't have a lot. They did not have a lot. Like, they had things taken away from them because they felt, oh, you shouldn't have 2 cars. You should, so there was a lot going on there in the story. Some systemic things that we see today,
sure.
Not from a healthcare perspective, but from a, their ability. You only, when a child is sick with cancer and there's 2 other kids, you're not going to have 2 working parents. So, but the community came together for them. And the newspaper, actually, we got letters to the editor from San Diego, from Seattle, from Michigan.
Awesome.
For this paper, a small paper in central Jersey, to get letters from, Newark, which is in northern New Jersey, and we got them from New York City, was a big deal, but let alone places. People were,
sure.
You had to email the link. There wasn't a share button.
Right.
So it was very, it really took on its own thing. But the thing about Elias is I actually followed him through his appointments, and he had been cancer free before, and I followed him through these appointments, and I don't know, I'm thinking I know life,
right,
but not knowing it, and I'm trying to keep it together now because I'm hardcore, remember. But I follow him through these appointments, and there's people saying, oh, make sure you see Dr. Sorrell, make sure you see Dr. Sorrell before you go. And I don't know what that means. We're going all these scans. It's a full day of stuff. And they waited for his father to get there. And he was just playing video games, and his brother and sister there. And this was the only time I'd ever gone with them in their car. So I actually can't leave.
Okay.
And he goes in. I'm not in there, but it's him and his parents. And at one point, his father came out and just was doubled over crying, like wailing. And this guy was a big, tough dude. You know what I mean? Like, he was a big, tough dude. And just muscle. Like, he was a construction guy. He was a union guy, and he had the huge arm, and he's just wailing, doubled over. He had no problem calling me a pencil pusher as a reporter, stuff like that.
Of course, right, exactly.
So, yeah, and he's doubled over crying. And, Elias was told, like, you're going to die from this. The cancer had spread all over his body, and he had a hole in his lung. And the thing was, he went home that night and he played with his younger brother and sister. And he went to school the next day. And, fast forward a couple of days, I'm about to put this bigger story together in the paper and let people know this. And, I couldn't write it. I couldn't start the piece. So I went back to his house. I left the newsroom and went back to his house. And I said, I never asked you, why did you go to school the next day? And he said to me, Mr. Jerry, because that's what he would call me. He's like, Mr. Jerry, if I just sat in my bed and pulled the covers over my head, it would not change my life. So I've got to live with what I have left. So that was, yeah. So that was the type of story that, I always wanted to tell, and I would, and I was able to tell that story, and I was with him when he passed at his bedside, and that's a whole nother thing. But, I think my should-haves in life certainly went away a lot. Like, if we look at what it did, I mean, my wife even told me, she goes, I think you are less selfish now. I think you're ready to be a parent. And actually, our oldest middle name is Elias. So this is exactly how we thought this would go. Just a couple of guys crying.
Couple of guys crying.
What we thought would be.
God. That's amazing, man. That's
so, yeah.
right.
So yeah, so that's kind of where it was. And then honestly, when that story, there was not much more I was going to do in the newspaper business.
Wow.
That was gonna.
It was that much a defining moment for you.
Oh yeah, I mean,
Wow.
yeah, for sure. And then I left that. I actually left and worked in New Jersey politics, and left that and struck out on my own to write the couple books and produce the films and do that. And but I would put the Hesburg film. Not that I'm here to plug that, but it's available on Prime. If you're a Prime member, or you can rent it kind of anywhere they stream videos. But I think the Hesburg film, from a meaningfulness of life and the storytelling and the intimacy of one's life and what the difference you can make with a life.
Right.
I think for me, those two are there. Those two are there.
That's amazing. And here's the thing. I got to do my little spot here. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Listening to the Zorich podcast with a guy that's making me cry, which I'm not supposed to be doing because we're supposed to be hardcore, Jerry Barca. So, but here's the thing I find that's interesting. So you have this woman out of the blue that calls you up and says, hey, you need to cover our Christmas story. So I look at moments like that could have been, she could have got your voicemail. You could have never returned it. She could have found somebody else. But it's kind of those that, although amazing story with Elias, right? Mm-hmm. But it's that moment in time where, had you not picked up the phone or said no, what path would you have been on, right? And again, I'm not trying to take anything away from your relationship with Elias, but before Elias, there was this phone call. So it's just so interesting how small moments, a 15-minute conversation literally changed your life to the point where, now, you're doing, obviously doing amazing things, but I think that's awesome. So
you're being generous. You're also being generous with the time of that conversation. I don't think it was probably like 5 minutes. See?
So when you look at, giving someone your time. So for example, like I'm immediately going to correlate this with a situation that really hit me when I had my foundation. I was playing in the NFL. I'm walking, and this is not a story where I'm going to make you cry. Okay, so it's not going to happen again. I promise it's not going to happen again. You don't get one cry per episode. So I'm walking down the street.
Did Pat Terrell make you cry?
Hell no, he didn't make me cry.
Right.
Are you kidding me? So it's the first time I cried. I mean, this is not something to brag about. So I'm walking down the street in Chicago, and this grandmother comes up to me and goes, hey, are you Chris Zorich? I'm like, yes, ma'am. You're barefoot. She's like, oh my God, yeah. But I really like what you're doing with the kids. And I was like, oh, thank you. And she pulls out this dollar bill and says, hey, this is for the kids. And I'm thinking like, lady, I make $1 million a year. Like, I'm a professional athlete. Like, why are you giving me this dollar? I'm like, oh, no, it's fine. She's like, no, take it because I trust you and I love what you're doing with the kids. Now, that is a 2-minute conversation. That affected me more than, a lot of other experiences I've had. So when you think about, had you not picked up the phone or, something else would have happened, your life would have been totally different. So I just think that's amazing.
It is. Actually, I never thought of it like that, but you're right. That's true.
So now, how do you become an executive producer on a George Plimpton documentary? I remember him, but how does that happen? You're like hustling, and well, first of all, tell me what an actual producer is, because I still don't know what the hell that is.
So I'm not an executive producer. Executive producers have they're making big shot calls.
An associate producer.
Yeah. So an associate producer is just like a guy. I'm just like a guy. I'm sort of like the undrafted free agent. They kind of we'll slot him in. We'll see if he can earn a contract for the next one. But no, my good friend, probably my best friend, who's a Notre Dame grad from 1998, Dennis Joyce, is the executive producer of that film. And when I was leaving politics, said, I have this thing going on. I'd like to see if you could help out. And that's how I came on to that. And,
Gotcha.
and you know, Dennis is a guy who's got a big belief in me and just was like, hey, you can do this. You should go write books. I mean, I was telling you earlier, that's how Unbeatable really happened, is Dennis and I were trying to make TV shows together. And we were in Hawaii doing a sizzle reel for a show called, that show was called Immersed. You were going to take like 3 average people and immerse them in an activity. And this one was triathlon in Hawaii.
Really? Just take an average person and throw them in a triathlon?
Well, they were a little above average.
I hope so.
Yeah. So, but it was funny, you know, from that team of people that was put together for a sizzle reel that ended up not becoming a show. You know, I went on to do the work that I did. One of them has started his own production company, Wes Denning. He used to be on True TV, one of those comic shows on there. Yeah. But he, Holy Moly, if you've seen the show Holy Moly on ABC, that's his production company is doing that. Wes is, and he's got Netflix shows out there, Ridiculously Skilled. Another guy is Carrie Chow, who I believe was the first Chinese American to host Sports Center. I could be wrong on that, but you know, he was on ESPN for years and is now the sports anchor for the NBC affiliate in Washington, D.C., doing sports. So, I mean, it was just like, who would have thought these people would have come together and then gone on and had these successes? But it was there that Wes introduced us to his talent agent. And I was like, how come there's no books about modern Notre Dame football? And the guy's like, well, you think you could do that? And I'm like, oh, yeah, sure. And
really?
That's
literally how it started.
Well, that's how that started. Yeah. So, you know, and then what happened is while I was writing that book, Catholics vs. Convicts, Robert Abbott, who was a former producer at ESPN, heard about that on a golf course from my brother. My brother, being a good big brother, was like, oh, my brother's writing this book. And he's like, that's the year they played Miami. That's the Catholics vs. Convicts game. That's a 30 for 30. But that was 2012. Like, we met with ESPN in July of 2012. And for 3 years, everybody said no. Everybody said
what was I mean, why? I mean, was it not just, I mean, did they not like your book? Or, I mean, what? No, I'm kidding. But, I mean, what was
They didn't
it?
like chapter 15.
They didn't like
a little less than chapter. Can we hear less about Burnham, 81st and Burnham?
Wow. Hey, that's impressive. Or they actually didn't care anything about the forearm on the
I know,
cover.
right?
However, now, hold on. Now, I think I should get, I don't think there's a forearm credit in your book. And I looked, there's no forearm credit.
There's no forearm credit. There's no
Dude,
forearm
that
credit.
is so my forearm. I guarantee you that's my forearm.
I know.
I think I know what picture that was from.
Yeah.
It might have been from
you had a little stash growing. You had a little stash going
right,
in that
exactly.
picture.
And it was just, it was after game.
Yes, and you're going to the student section.
See? Exactly. I totally remember that.
That is that photo. That is that photo for sure. So everybody said no. I think, you know, John Dahl at ESPN, they were looking to fill, I think it was Jenna Anthony is who he was working with at ESPN. And they were looking to fill the docket of 30 for 30s. But Robert Abbott had been so persistent in not giving up on this for 3 years that they were like, well, we have this Catholics vs. Convicts, but then they're like, but we don't really have a director for it. And the great thing about 30 for 30 is it's so director driven.
Real? Okay.
Yeah, so you need to find that director storyteller. And they did a Google search, which I've called the divine Google search. Famous Notre Dame graduates. And on the Wikipedia page of famous Notre Dame graduates is Pat Creedon.
No way.
And they're like, they knew some of his work because he had acclaimed documentaries before that. And they're like, let's give him a call. Let's see if he knows anything about this. So, I mean, he was right in the middle of the T-shirt stuff. Yeah, right. I mean, incredible. And then, so we actually, Pat and I spoke for the first time in August. We first rolled cameras in October.
Wow.
Okay? And then we handed ESPN a film the following August.
No.
Yeah, which is incredible.
That has to be a record. That's crazy.
I don't know if it's a record, but I mean, it debuted to 2.11 million people watching it after the Heisman Trophy. after Lamar Jackson, who
that,
wasn't as known as he is known now.
Yeah.
Won the Heisman Trophy. So it was amazing. I feel like I should go turn on the lights or something here, but like I feel like it's like the sun's going down. I apologize.
No,
Maybe
it's not. You're fine.
Light myself.
Yeah, exactly. Hold it right there, right?
That's
so. Bad. See, if you knew what you were going to be doing and you're prepared for it, you'd have a nice light. Like, come on, man, this is a big operation. I assumed you had that. I know you're big time and everything, so I assumed you had that. Yeah. So let's just back up a little bit because we kind of skipped over. I mean, writing this book had to be, in one hand, a great experience because, like, literally you were there at age 11, but then also, I mean, trying to track these guys down. I mean, learning these stories, and a lot of these guys love Notre Dame. A lot of these guys hate Notre Dame as well. So I'm sure you kind of ran into some guys that weren't willing to talk to you. But I mean, how was that experience writing this book?
I wrote the book over 6 months. So that was, that I think was the toughest part. 84,000 words. There we go.
There you go. Wow. I'm not sure what happened, but it must be nice.
I texted someone in the house, but I think writing the book it was a lot to do in 6 months. I did a sample chapter, then the book gets purchased, and they're like, "All right, great. We want to have it ready for October, so then we can do it for the 25th anniversary of the team." So, but I was so new that my experience more was really being caffeinated. Like I would write. So I had my kids were very young. They were 5 and below, 4 kids, 5 and below. And so I would research and write during the day. And I would sleep toward the end. I was only sleeping in like 2-hour clips. So I would at 11 o'clock, I would go to Dunkin' Donuts and I would get a 20-ounce Coke and a coffee. And at first I would also get a donut, but then you learn after 2 days, they're not really fresh at that time. So it's not worth it. And I would drink that and I would do the rewriting, which was where the real stuff that ends up in the book. I would rewrite what I did the previous day, the writing. So I'd be away from it for a day and rewrite between like 11:30 and 3:30 and 4:30. And then I'd sleep till about 6:30 and get the kids up and out the door. So, and then I would sleep like 1-2 hour clips a couple times during the day. So that's kind of how, like, from that perspective, how it went. I think the person who's the surprising person who would give me an interview was Roger Baldessari. My guy, that I knew since I was 11 years old was like, no, I think I'm going to write a book someday. And it was funny because at the anniversary for the team, which was in the Monogram Room at Notre Dame in 2013, Roger, unbeknownst to me, so Roger's there and he sees me and he pinches my cheek, and grabs me, here, and he's like,
sure.
He goes, "You're mad at me." I said, "No, how could I ever be mad at you?" And he said, "Well, I called you," but he had called me and I was traveling out to South Bend.
Okay.
And he said, I couldn't put your book down. He said, I consider those guys one of my teams. They're one of my teams. I know everybody thinks it's Ara's teams, but those guys were my team. And he's like, you nailed it, which for me, certainly meant a lot from him.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
And of course there were guys that, didn't participate,
right.
But that's their choice.
Right.
I get that. And it's up to them. And like Stoney, I love Stoney, but he chose not to participate, and that's cool.
Right.
And there's enough stuff out there on Michael Stonebreaker. It's not like he's not going to get included in the story of the team.
Right.
So, but I think there's that, and then there's the guys that, like, what chapter 15 is about. I'll get other guys. I mean, they're opening the book, going right to the back, like going to the index and saying, "All right, what did he write about? What did he write about here? What did he write?" Oh, I mean, I did get to, like, you messed up my statistics, and then like my heart would drop. Like, oh my gosh, there's a mistake in the book. I'm the worst person in the world. Why did I do that? And then I go back and I read. I'm like, well, if you go back and read that, it says these were your stats going into the 9th game.
See,
and it's funny. Right. And it's funny because then I've read other sports books, and that was my first book. I'm like, nobody cares about the stats.
Exactly. Except the guy. That's ridiculous.
and I just finished the biography on Derek Jeter, and it was a great book, but it was funny. Like I skim read like a lot of the game summary stuff because I wanted to get like how is
Right.
Jeter? Let me get to that.
Right. Exactly.
So,
Which and it's really interesting because when you're doing that, and I would think that like after you send somebody a piece and you're like you want their response, hey, what'd you think? And they don't give you that return call. You're like, oh man, you know what? Shit, I messed it up. You know what? They're pissed. I can't imagine how that was.
Yeah, I think yes, in the moment, yes, for sure. It's absolutely like that pit in your stomach. I think after you do it a number of years,
right?
Because part of the reason, Unbeatable and the Catholics vs. Convicts movie, I did not think that in the bigger world of college football, I did not think the '88 Notre Dame national championship team got its due, and I think that the book. I mean, let's be honest, the book less so, right? Catholics vs. Convicts being on the ESPN platform,
sure.
And I think you've gotten your due. Maybe we don't need to do College Game Day. We ride motorcycles together story. I mean, like we're good, guys. We're good. We've seen them enough. I'm only like 10% kidding. But part of that was so there would be some sort of memory of this team and how special it was. Because like, we were saying earlier, I do think for a particular group of Notre Dame fans, the Tony Rice, Rocket, yourself, you can rattle off these names, Volcar, Terrell, White, and people, that's their Notre Dame, their introduction to what Notre Dame football was. And yes, there's one national title there, but I think I looked at it and it was like something like close to 20% or more of the time ranked in the top 5 in the Holtz era.
Yeah, it was insane.
So
it was insane.
Yeah, I mean, and I think I could be off there. I think there's a run from '88 through '93 where it's top 10 all the time. So,
and here's the interesting thing, and this obviously, we're actually going over the hour, so I hope you're allowed to be on TV on camera a little bit more. But you got so much stuff to talk about. So the book, and again, obviously with Notre Dame fans, I'm doing my Irish thing. So are you just a diehard Giants fan? Or, where did your next book come from? Because I think that was interesting. And what was interesting for me was that, when I took a look at it, for me, it was the '85 Bears. And then now you're talking like the next, and I remember the Giants back during that time. They were ass kickers, man. They were great. And so was this just kind of a labor of love for you? Had you been a Giants fan since you were a Giants fan / Notre Dame fan? Or how'd that work out?
Yeah. No, I was a Giants fan before I was a Notre Dame football fan. I mean, I knew I was 1983, Parcells' first year. They were 3-12-1. I mean, they were an embarrassing franchise at that point, but I loved them. Loved Harry Carson, Brad Van Pelt, LT. And so I'm trying to think who, not Gary Reasons, but Brian Kelly was the other linebacker there. That's a very different book.
Sure, right.
But I was a fan. Like when the Bears beat the Giants 21-0 in the divisional round, when the Bears won the Super Bowl, I threw up Cheese Whiz when Sean Landeta whipped that punt in the end zone. Like I was 9 years old, just gotten home from Our Lady of the Valley, Mass, and I'm like eating the Cheese Whiz with the nachos, and I'm like, he does that, and I'm just like, and I mean, but that's like, I'm not that type of fan anymore. But like, I cried in the Cotton Bowl when they took Tim Brown's towel away. Like, I went up after dinner that night, and I cried alone. Like not in front of people. I wasn't going to show that vulnerability. I had safe space.
Oh my God.
But like, that's the type of fan I was. But the Giants book is very different, and they're different. They listen. I love you guys, and I have much more of a longer relationship with guys on the ND 88 team.
Sure.
The Giants guys, they were pros in New York City, and they won a Super Bowl there, and most of them won a second Super Bowl.
What the
hell? They know the game.
Crazy.
Yeah, and they know the game. They know the deal. They know the drill. Like, so it's a very different. And it's New York City. It's the '80s. There's stuff in that book that guys were willing to talk about that you would never see in a Notre Dame book. And quite frankly, there's so many reasons you'd never see it in a Notre Dame book.
Sure.
But you'd also, New York is different than Northern Indiana.
Very
and
true.
the media light that's on there. So I think that book is I don't know, and it's funny because I enjoyed writing that book, and the only person who didn't participate in that book that's involved in that team, and this includes Parcells and Belichick, was LT. He's the only one that didn't. And again, there was enough stuff out there.
Oh, right. In public, yeah, exactly.
But it's the Giants being involved with organized crime in there. There's all these elements of that. So,
wasn't there? I think I remember when it came. There was a Bada Bing, or wait, no, not the real Bada Bing, but
no, the actual real life Bada Bing. A Giants. This guy Brian Kelly took ownership of that. Was a part owner, and it eventually became the Bada Bing.
Oh my God!
Or Satin Dolls is the name of the place. Yeah. So there's all kinds of things like that. It is I remember my sister, who's an avid reader, and she would read the books before they came out, and she was like, "Ooh, this is different." Because the Notre Dame book, it's a great story arc. You have great characters. You have misfits and never will be's in a program that was down, on its rise, beating the arch enemy of the day.
Right.
So you have this great story arc, and I love Tony Rice's story. And again, there was a guy who I didn't think there was enough out about what he did and what he accomplished at that position, at that, at a place like Notre Dame. It's different when you're talking about this kicker that I found who played for the Giants for 2 games, and because Parcells got mad at Raul Allegre, who was with Raul Allegre, who ends up kicking game winners for the Giants that season, was working for the Indiana State Department of Transportation, doing engineering on bridges during the season, while this guy Joe Cooper is living in the basement in Lodi, New Jersey, of this Italian couple. I mean, it's not the NFL life that people expect.
Right.
He goes to this deli in town, and the Italian couple finds out, and they're like, "Oh, no. You don't go behind the beaded curtain there. Those men are going to want you to do things that you don't want to do." So it's just those are it's pro and college. There's a stark difference in them. Hopefully it's entertaining. And the Giants are also a rise, but it's a different type of rise. I think the thing people also admit is you guys are kids. You're in college. You're 18 to 22 years old. You are kids, still very much in formation.
Right.
In the pros, you are kids, but the expectations, and many of those guys were pros. Already they were into their late 20s or early 30s.
Sure. So from there, you go into actually producing. So before you did I'm trying to get a good transition here, because the idea that you do Catholics versus Convicts, but then you've also done the Last Days of Night, I think was great, because I'm a huge Bobby Knight fan. And although he got a lot of crap, and obviously you know a lot more than I do, but those are the coaches that you went through a wall for. And it was funny because when I watched it, I mean, people were getting upset because he was yelling at kids and swearing at them. And I'm like, and I know it was more than that, but it's just wait a minute, this is my high school football coach. This is Lou Holtz. I mean, this is how programs get to the top. I mean, no coach, I don't care what you're coaching, nobody's Mr. Rogers.
Yeah, I think that's changed, though. I do think that's
absolutely
changed.
It has.
And I think there were 2 things that went on for Bobby Knight. One is, as he got older, he recruited less. I mean, Glenn Robinson going to Purdue was a big loss for IU. And then, in talking to other coaches, you found that he he enjoyed doing other things that were no longer the grind of coaching.
Sure.
And I think you also,
but when you get to that level, though, Jerry, when you think Nick Saban isn't recruiting the way he did when he was the second year at Alabama,
football might be.
You know that for a fact.
Yeah, football might be different though, but I do think you see leadership, particularly in basketball, when you look at a Popovich and you look at a Steve Kerr.
Sure.
I do think you see a change. I think first off, in college basketball, those early 90s, with the advent of the Fab Five and players being, like a Chris Webber, leaving early there, and he did 2 years. But I think there's a shift in how much control you have of players.
Sure.
And that's particularly on the college level. But I also think you see, like, if you watch The Last Dance, I mean, Jordan's leadership, which I think a lot of people love, was like, you're going to get on my train and it's going this way, or this train's going to roll over you.
Right.
I don't think anymore that's the way. I think where you look at successful operations, and again, I might throw football a little to the side. I think this is worthy of discussion. I'm not saying I'm right about this.
Sure.
But I think you look at leaders are trying to empower the team.
I understand that.
To feel like a team and to be greater than the sum of their parts.
Sure. And I'm not saying that I'm condoning everything he did. I mean, I thought it was nuts he threw the chair.
I think you're totally for it. I think you sound like you're totally for it.
No, but which is, and see, here's the thing, and I think you hit the nail on the head. He would have been a great football coach. Am I right?
Well, yeah. Well, funny you should say this. He's on the sidelines of the Giants in '86 wearing like a Giants satin jacket. He was great friends with Bill Parcells.
Oh, my
God.
God.
When he was coaching at West Point, Parcells went down with him to the Madison Square Garden at one point. I think Parcells got into it with the fans. So, I mean, he could have been from that. And I think football might be different, but I do think you're going to begin to see football change a bit as well. So, look,
it's already changed.
You have to execute, right? You have to execute and you have to produce. But I think the idea of inspiring performance through force and intimidation, people are going to be like, I'll go do something else.
Well, no, and I think you're right. But that has to do with kids changing, right? And I, unfortunately, the reason why, and this is my theory, the reason why this all happened was when they started giving participation trophies to every freaking kid on the team.
Now you're ready for sports talk radio.
That is the biggest, come on, man. That is the biggest crock of bull. Are you kidding me? Whatever happened, look, man, you know what? You're fourth place. You don't get a trophy. First, second, and third. Be happy. Go work harder, and then you might get third. And you know what? If you work harder, you might get second. And then guess what? Year after that, you may be first. But it's up to you. You didn't get a goddamn participation trophy? Come on, it's ridiculous.
And that's Chris Zorich with your ESPN 1000 minutes.
Well, I'm just saying, man. Come on, seriously.
No, I don't think, but like, I don't think it can be attributed. I think there are bottlenecks naturally in youth sports, and it's particularly when it moves away from the parents.
Sure.
If you're middle school, like if you're on a middle school team, once you get to high school, that's a bottleneck. Listen, anybody can play AAU basketball, but if you want to be on an elite team and you want to get particular minutes on that team, you've got to show up. Like, I do think there are bottlenecks where that goes away. Do athletes feel a bit more catered and coddled to at times? They might, but I mean, that's just, I think maybe coaches have to shift to, the job of the coaches, right? Isn't it, I got to get the most I can out of that individual player. How do I do that? That might be different. Whereas in the past, I could get you, if I were a coach, there were ways I could get you all wired up and tuned up to play. That it just might be different now. You just might have to take a different pathway to that. But I think to think that I don't know. I don't.
Well, all right, okay. I'm sorry.
So trophies either.
It's a couple things. It's participation trophies, and damn ESPN allowing kids switching hats on freaking the letter of intent day. Are you kidding me? See, and then I don't even want to talk about putting high school sports on ESPN, because now you got every kid They don't care about the team. They just want to make individual plays so they can show up on SportsCenter. But that's way beyond it. All right. Okay. So now let's move on from my getting excited and fired up.
I'm Chris Zorich. I'm going to blame the media.
Can you believe I was crying like 10 minutes ago? That's crazy.
I know.
Right. So now let's talk about this labor of love, Hesburg.
Yeah.
So now this
I wouldn't call it a labor of love. That's not a labor of love. It's a critically acclaimed film. It's a New York Times critics pick. It's not some passion project. Don't throw passion project at an artist, Zorich.
Wow.
Don't throw passion project at an artist.
I didn't really. Hey man, I'm used to interviewing football players,
kidding.
man. I'm used to interviewing football players where it's emotion. It's for the love of the game, and now you're going to talk about rating, or now you're going to talk about critical reviews and everything else. Come on, man, you give me a break, right?
No, I know. I'm just busting your chops. But for an artist, when you're like, whenever you hear passion project in the industry, you're like,
okay, sorry.
That probably doesn't mean it has the fun.
You know what?
And I'm
duly noted. Duly noted. I'm sorry. You gave me your mom put you on a goddamn plane to South Bend at 11. So you know what? My bad. I'm sorry. I assumed you were very excited, passionate about this project, but you know what?
I am passionate.
Duly noted. When talking to a Hollywood producer, I need to take it. Okay, I'm writing it right down right now. All right, thank you.
Pat Terrell never talks to me this way.
Wow.
That's why he's got one of these. That's why he got a game ball.
We have a small segment here before we get into his critically acclaimed documentary, Hesburg. So I'm at Pat Terrell's house a couple months ago. We're hanging out. And in his beautiful basement, he has this beautiful football that literally says, Catholic versus Convicts, has a score on there, University of Miami. And I'm like, wow, where did you get that? And he's like, what, you don't have one? And I'm like, no. He's like, oh, dude, Jerry. Oh, I got it from Jerry. We called Jerry up right then, doesn't answer. We sent him a text, me and Pat with the ball going like, where's my ball? So you can kind of go on, tell the story after that, how
this is just,
answer.
We have a bunch of these around the house. We just throw them around in the yard. We get them scuffed up. I'm like, kids are like, can we play with this in the street, Dad? I'm like,
sure, why not? We got 12 more downstairs, no problem.
Well, the thing about Pat is he did make the play.
Single-handedly, he did. He actually did. Single-handedly, yes.
Yeah, if he doesn't do that, if that ball bounces off his face mask and up over his head, we got problems. We got real problems.
We got a lot of problems. Folks don't make documentaries. Folks don't make 30 for 30s. Yeah. Okay, I'm sorry. So Hesburg. So now you have this critically acclaimed documentary. So how did this start? Are you guys just like sitting? When I say sorry, I talk about Pat Creedon as well. But the idea that you have this, I don't know how to describe it. This legend, this amazing man among men, right? How do you? I'm sure you could have done part 2, 3, 4, and 5. You just have all this. What information didn't make it?
Oh, well, there's a lot, and I think that when Pat approached me with this idea, we actually had left the grotto and we were walking, be up in front of the main building, in between the basilica and the main building. And I remember where I was, and he said, "What do you think of that as a film, as an idea?" And I just knew there were two things. I said, "Wow, you're talking about the second most influential educator in the history of the United States, to like a Thomas Jefferson."
Seriously?
And I just knew the climb would be a very steep one. I think, you look at Catholics versus Convicts, I think that's like when you go to a wedding and they have these Parisian tables with just this endless amount of desserts.
Right.
That's what I think it is. And Hesburg, the information and content in there, it's powerful and it's moving, but it is not dessert. It's a bit more of like, you got to eat your vegetables. You want to grow up and be strong, you're going to need to eat this. You're going to need to know this. And so I think one of the things Pat and I did early on, and Pat taught me a lot. Here he is, he's got a master's degree from the American Film Institute. He's the real deal when it comes to a director. I think his track record of films show that with IOUSA, you know, Catholics versus Convicts, obviously. And he's probably gonna be mad. The crossword puzzle doc is escaping me right now, which like debuted at Sundance.
Right.
It's like incredible. And I don't know why I can't think of it right now, so I apologize. That I can't. But you know, Pat's got a great vision for things. So it would be about 6 a.m. Pacific and 9 a.m. East Coast, and we'd be on the phone building, you know, box cars that he would like. What are the stories? What are the box cars? How do we get from scene A to B? And that's kind of how eventually we looked at the narrative flow of things. And you know, the thing like Hesburg, you know, I remember there was a screening Pat was at, and he showed it, and you know, someone kept raising their hand in the back, like, you should have included this, you should have included that, and he's like, but you know, I think you got to shave 6 minutes off, but it's too long. And we're like, well, how do we include those 12 stories?
Right.
And I think that really sums up the difficulty in putting together the story. At the same time, I think what we ended up with was a story. We wanted to tell the story, this great big story, for a wide audience, not just for the Notre Dame audience.
Right.
And I think it debuted at a film festival on Father's Day in Washington, D.C. at dinner time. I mean, that's the time that everybody goes to the movies. I'm just obviously kidding about that. And, you know, the emotional reaction we heard from the crowd that night, which ended up being sold out. There ended up being people waiting that couldn't get in to see it, about 3 dozen. Yeah, very surprising. We, you know, Pat, myself, Christine O'Malley, Pat's wife and producing partner, and she's another genius in the industry. You know, we thought, hey, we have something special here. Let's see what we can do. So this film ends up going into theaters. You know, like I said, it was a New York Times critics pick. It was also an Entertainment Weekly. It got graded. You know, it's a B plus. I don't know if it's a B plus or it was a must see doc. It was on our must see films list. I mean, Father Hesburg being an Entertainment Weekly, not something we would have predicted. Right. So the fact that you kind of had this reach and that it played in 60 cities across the United States was pretty incredible. And so, you know, I don't know, that story, I think there's a couple things about it, and I don't want to be spoiler alert guy. That's why I've kind of not spoken in specifics, but I think obviously his work on civil rights was a very important story for us. I think his ability to collaborate with people from both sides, from many different ideologies, was important to us, and how that became a much more timely film. That's something that can be looked at in the present era, that I think is important. That when we started to make the film, that wasn't our idea. We knew we were doing something historic, but given where we are in the country, and I would say given where we are in the country today, it's still an important film to go look at what leadership can look like, and move things forward. And I think obviously his relationship to being a priest is like something that I don't think people, it's certainly not the image of the priest that's currently out there in, you know, especially if you're not a Catholic. So, and his relationship to that is great. But I also think there are points in the film that really humanize him. And I think his relationship with his caregiver, his late in life caregiver, having his brother in there is really great. There's a guy, Marty Ogren, who drove Father Hesburg, who, you know, is able to speak to that. And I think, you know, we are able to, and I think Pat and the filmmaking team did a brilliant job with the material we had to take you into the intimacy of his death, which, you know, is ridiculously profound. And I'll leave it. I mean, I don't want to say more about it because I'd rather people go out there and click on Amazon and spend the 104 minutes and watch it. And I will, my promise is it delivers. You know, my promise is you'll have a moving experience watching this.
But the amazing thing is that for such a long period of time, because of Father Hesburg, I mean, Notre Dame, I mean, they were in the conversation. And this had absolutely nothing to do about athletics, right? I mean, we're talking about civil rights. We're talking about women's rights. We're talking about Vietnam. I mean, we're talking about being on the world stage, and he's there. You know, presidents need his advice. And, you know, this is something that, and I can imagine, I could see kind of how, you know, you look back and look back your experience with Elias, and it's like, you know, I was meant to do this, right? I mean, I was meant to make a difference. And when you highlight people like Father Hesburg, or when you put your blood, sweat, and tears into a project, like, you know, when it's done, you know, after it cut and everything was in the movies, you had to like pat yourself on the back, you know? It's like, this is a job well done, because the amount of people that this is going to reach, and the amount of people you reach, but more importantly, the message. Dude, there's people that have seen Father Hesburg that's seen Hesburg that maybe aren't Notre Dame fans. They're the people that watched Hesburg and realized kind of what their responsibility is. I mean, you look at what just happened with our civil rights movement now, losing John Lewis. I mean, this is somebody, I mean, he's up there with Dr. King. He's up there with Rosa Parks. I mean, he made that difference. He used his platform to make a difference. And that's when Notre Dame was literally on the world stage. And you guys captured that. It was amazing. It was amazing. And it's funny because when I had the opportunity to be at the premiere in Chicago, you know, I'm thinking like, man, I have like a 15-minute like cigar story like about Hesburg. Like, I feel like an idiot. Like I mean, like it's like he gets Nobel Peace Prize folks talking to him, and now he's like, and now I'm like, oh, yeah, we share a cigar. Like, I mean, I feel so inadequate.
But it's funny. I think that's a takeaway from the movie, though. I think that's one of the things. And one is, I wouldn't pat myself on the back. I feel very lucky to have done this, and that is to work with the team I work with, and that it got the reception that it got. Because if it doesn't get that reception, then people probably don't see it. But I think you're right. Like, I think one of the takeaways is, what am I doing with my life?
Right.
And I remember, you know, you write down, you know, what I oftentimes will write down on major projects, what my goal is, what I want it to be at the end. And it's just like going back to writing an affirmation in the, you know, mid-90s about something. And I wrote down that I wanted, when the credits rolled, I wanted people to be inspired by what one man could do with his life and what they could do with their own.
Wow.
And that was like, I mean, you're talking, we are in the middle of, we don't even know what the story is. And I wrote that. Right. And I think sometimes that hits. Sometimes that hits with people with the film. And I think that's a great thing, because, you know, there is a gap between what we do and what we can do to make a difference.
Sure.
And I think that's a really good takeaway, you know.
Look, dude, I'm looking at the time, and I promised an hour, so I apologize. We actually did 90 minutes, so I'm so sorry about that, man. Dude,
don't be sorry.
Stop.
It's bonus time.
I mean,
Reggie Brooks couldn't do this. Tony couldn't do this.
Well,
he doesn't have this.
You actually have the title of making me cry. So this is my first time crying. I have not cried since. I've not cried since I've had a podcast. So this is actually a little embarrassing. But when you tell stories like that, it's, you know, I mean, it's interesting how the small things in life affect you. And not saying that, you know, you spending time with them was small, but it's those things that are unexpected. You know, it's that phone call. It's having a chance to have somebody come up that has seen Hesburg and says, hey, you don't know who I am, but my grandfather marched with him. And then you're like, whoa, you know, and knowing that you were responsible in some way to kind of put that out there. And however people are going to, because I'm sure, like you said, I mean, I don't think anybody criticized it, but I'm sure you have people like, you know, what about this? What about that? Versus
yeah, for sure. And I think people should
that came up to you and said, wow, you know, I knew him, but now I really know him.
Yeah, no, and that was very nice. And I think it's really just more humbling, you know. And I think with Hesburg, the difference is you know, I'm very humbled to have been one of the storytellers in his life. I mean, it's would have never predicted it, and it is because he means so much to so many people. I think it's just I'm more humbled by all of that, and just happy that this exists and can be shared with people.
Oh, well, that's a great note to leave it on. Dude, this has been awesome. This has been, I don't want to say this is my favorite one because you made me cry, but this is my almost favorite one because you actually brought some emotion out to me. Jerry, thank you very much. The idea that I'm trying to do something a little different with this podcast, and when I've had the guys on, the players, we've never talked about touchdowns. We've talked about their experiences at Notre Dame. We've talked about, I did Stoney. I roomed with the guy. He told stories I didn't even know about him. I'm like, what the hell? And I think that it comes true with what you shared with us about how Elias affected your life. Mm-hmm. And that's what I want to do with this. I don't want to just kind of rattle off names and say, hey, how was, give me the lowdown on the behind the scenes of Catholic versus Convicts. It's not worth that. As I get older, I realize that we're all affected by certain things, right? So for me, it's making sure that the small things are accounted for. And so that's why when I immediately heard that story, my first reaction was, what if he didn't pick up that phone? Or when the woman called you from the hospital. And so you look at how that small gesture affected your life and what it's done since then, right? Who knows? You could have been at the Philadelphia Inquirer writing some great stories, but, we don't see a Hesburg documentary. We don't see Catholic versus Convicts. We don't see the Bobby Knight story, but more importantly, what about your change, right? So let's say, you never write that story about Elias. How would, and maybe you would have been affected by something else, but it's just interesting how things happen.
Yeah. I think it's a walk in faith. You know what I mean? I think there are things that, I think you're on point in what you're seeing. And I also think that, there's something bigger than us at play.
Very true. Very true. Jerry, thank you so much. For the folks who want to watch this, who may have missed it because it was so freaking long, who may have missed the beginning or they got tired, hopefully they didn't, or our other interviews we did on the Zorich podcast, please check out my YouTube page at Chris Zorich 50. Jerry, this has been an awesome ride. I did not think you would make me cry. I'm impressed. And who would have known when you called me a gazillion years ago, said, hey, man, can you talk to me about the 88 team?
Yeah, very easy to get on the phone. It's only probably a dozen calls. I'm sorry.
Hey, I know I was easier than Pat Terrell.
Oh, Pat's ready, man. Pat's camera.
Actually,
ready.
maybe not, because he would have been like, oh, story 88 team? I'm there. Oh, yeah, it was about me. So, Jerry, thank you so much, man. I really had a blast. Look forward to hanging out with you some more, man.
Yes, you got it. Thanks, Chris.
All right, brother. Be good, man. You know what? I'm sorry. Man, come on. You got me so fired up, man. I forgot. I got to thank the folks involved, man. I got to thank my wife. I'm getting trouble for this, man. She's our producer extraordinaire and director, and everything that has to do with IT for this broadcast. I would also like to thank the folks watching on Facebook Live. I just got to say thank you very much for watching, and go Irish. Jerry, thanks a lot, bro.